honestly. They've used Naganadel and Whimsicott, which is a very interesting combination, and they're coming back with an interesting team this week as well. There is no Incineroar, which is very strange to see in a Spike Mega Cup.
Yes, and over on Daniela's side, we have the more classic core of, Rillaboom and Incineroar, as well as that presumably water Urshifu, although there is a Feeny I see now, so perhaps this is actually a darker Urshifu. I guess we'll see that going into the match later on, possibly, if he chooses to bring it. But I would say that the core thing here is that, the classic Rillaboom Incineroar rotation core, and then we also have Amoonguss, which you don't see very often alongside Rillaboom, since most people don't want to double up on those grass types. So I'm curious about that, and then with the Feeny as well, he'll have to be careful to not accidentally set up Misty Terrain to block his own spores, or to remove his own Rillaboom's grassy terrain, etc. So I feel like his team has a lot of options, and at the same time seems rather difficult to play. So quite the curious team as well on his end.
Yeah, and I love the addition of the Spectre over on Danielle's side, anticipating the common core of Incineroar and Rillaboom, being able to cycle those fake outs. Of course, you cannot fake out a ghost type. And maybe Spectre is also carrying something like Will-O-Wisp, so they are able to, with something like an Urshifu, a Rillaboom, or even I see that very interesting Komodo over on Angelo's side, getting a Wisp over onto that thing will definitely shut down its pretty powerful, presumable Iron Defense Body Press coming out.
Yeah, I agree that the Body Press set is probably the most likely on a team like Angelo's. In theory, it could also run like Clangorous Soul or something, but in a format like this, Iron Defense Body Press has proven to be like a really strong combination. And I'm curious about the Grimmsnarl as well. Like, is that going to be like a Trick Wagging Tail set or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. And screens aren't as oppressive in this format as they were in previous, now that we have no max, so Urshifu can just crit through those screens. It looks like we're going to go ahead and get into this first match between Angelo and Danielle.
Yes, we're heading right into the match. Daniela is sending out the Urshifu and Incineroar, and I guess we'll get to see that typing. Looks like an Urshifu as well on Angelo's side, as well as a Rillaboom. So I do believe that from the animation, these are both water Urshifus actually. So quite a curious choice there.
Yeah, it's great to see because this water type Urshifu matches up very nicely up into Danielle's team, able to get some big hits onto the Incineroar, and as well not being weak to the opposing Urshifu. The only bad thing is Rillaboom is the second most popular Pokemon in this format right now, so both Urshifus have to be a little bit weary of taking those super effective grassy glides.
Yes, and Daniela has a Rillaboom of his own on his team, so perhaps that Incineroar is going to be switching out here. That is a very real possibility, so it's curious to see how Angelo responds to that.
Yeah, and the downside for Angelo not having their own Incineroar is they are going to lose the Fake Out War. Well, depending on how their Rillaboom would be terrain, although Danielle's Incineroar not going for Fake Out at all, actually opting to send in the Tapu Fini, shutting down that grassy terrain.
Yes, that's a very clever play, I agree, and we will see if that ends up working out, if this is a grassy glide. No, looks like it's just a normal fake out into that Incineroar, although Urshifu actually goes for a U-turn, doing a lot of damage. Ouch.
Massive chunk.
50%.
Yeah, that was a very
curious.
So sorry.
Sorry, you go ahead.
That was a very interesting turn over on Danielle's end. I think that they anticipated the potential that the Rillaboom would be able to outspeed the Incineroar, knowing how their Incineroar's train, and it looks like Incineroar is coming back out onto the Urshifu spot. So 2 intimidates onto Angelo's side of the field, and it looks like Angelo will be opting to switch out that Urshifu using a U-turn of their own. So like I was saying earlier in the previews, this format is all about positioning, all about cycling the intimidates and the fake outs. So a lot of these games are going much longer than previous formats where you could just click Dynamax and simply remove a threat from the field.
Right, and now the Nihilego is coming out for Angelo, but I do want to briefly mention that we did see that his Grimmsnarl is actually more of a classic screen set. And it's a very interesting choice of him to have that in the back rather than in the front. So looking at what this Nihilego is going for now, obviously that Incineroar is threatened, but at the same time it's got that fake out pressure as well. And the Feeny similarly threatened, so we'll be curious to see what happens here. Perhaps a simple fake out into the Nihilego, perhaps something else.
Absolutely, and having that Grimmsnarl in the back is not a horrible idea. I mean, having a bulkier Pokemon under screens for the end game can definitely stall things out and allow you to position back into the advantage. Unfortunately, Angelo did not bring something like that Komodo. So I'm interested to see how the Pokemon he did bring end up benefiting from those screens.
Yes, and it looks like that Feeny is switching out again, going into that Urshifu, as we do see a fake out from the Incineroar going into the Nihilego. Daniele understandably deciding that, oh, that Nihilego is too much of a threat. And the Rillaboom also U-turning out. It's a revolving door of Pokemon, as some like to say. And perhaps we'll actually see the Grimmsnarl come out now.
Yeah, absolutely. And having Pokemon that they currently have out under the screens, having Nihilego under screens might allow it to live something like a Muddy Water if that type of Feeny were to come back out, but it looks like the Urshifu will be coming back onto the field now that it has to reset those multiple Intimidate attack drops.
Yes, Angela is preserving that Grimmsnarl rather well, and it's almost making me think that maybe he only brought it to have some sort of fairy type, or maybe he was particularly worried about the Urshifu. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, given he has his own Rillaboom. So we will see if it ends up actually doing much this game. Regardless, Urshifu back in, it can threaten down that Incineroar, but Daniele can simply go out into Rillaboom or even Tapu Fini. And looks like the Nihilego is actually finally going out into the Grimmsnarl. Very curious.
Grimmsnarl actually matches up pretty well into Danielle's Spectrier and Tapu Fini as well, having access to Spirit Break. Spirit Break is an 85 base power fairy type move that also lowers the target's special attack. So if the Tapu Fini were to go for something like a Calm Mind, setting up its specials, Grimmsnarl will be able to take advantage of that and shut it right down. It looks like a close combat coming out into the Grimmsnarl. It's fairy type, making it not super effective, but still taking a massive chunk of damage.
Yes, and similarly, the Surging Strikes from Angelo going into that Rillaboom switch in. He could have gone for something like an Ice Punch, I believe he had that, trying to predict that, but nothing like that, just going for the straight up safe play. And as you mentioned, the Grimmsnarl took quite a big chunk from that Urshifu. So what do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see the Grimmsnarl doing much in the current position. It could go for a Spirit Break, it could also go for something like a Thunder Wave, but setting up screens in front of an Urshifu, in my opinion, is not a great idea because its signature move does crit, which does go through screens, unfortunately. So that's why I do believe that Grimmsnarl, one of the most popular Pokemon in previous formats, has seen a lot of just plummeting usage. So I'm interested to see what Angelo can make happen with this Grimmsnarl.
Yes, and it looks like Angelo has locked in his moves, Daniele taking a slightly longer time. It's entirely possible for Daniele to, we'll see, he can go for a Grassy Glide here into the Urshifu, and that is a knockout straight up. And that Grimmsnarl rather threatened as well, but it does get its Thunder Wave off, so we'll see if perhaps there's a paralysis or something of that sort here. Yeah, oh no, close combat goes ahead, and that's 2 knockouts in 1 turn.
Yeah, unfortunately, Angelo losing both of his Pokemon in 1 turn. He still has 2 in the back. Potentially can make something happen with the 2. The Nihilego is still fairly healthy. We will see the Rillaboom come back out holding that Assault Vest, but unfortunately it will only help them against the Tapu Fini. They do have pressure for Fake Out on this turn, so maybe Angelo's Rillaboom can fake out Danielle's Rillaboom, hoping that the Urshifu will get fully paralyzed this turn, or vice versa, target into the Urshifu and try to take out the Rillaboom with something like Sludge Bomb. Very tricky position for Angelo to be in, unfortunately, but even in this kind of board state, it is still game one, so it's very important to try to fish for information, locate items, see what moves your opponent is carrying. You never want to give up just too soon.
Yes, and I do think an interesting option on Daniela's side is going into the Feeny actually here. Maybe trying to catch a Grassy Glide into that Urshifu and then getting that KO onto the Nihilego with a simple Surging Strikes. And it looks like that is not going to happen though, just a Grassy Glide into Daniela's Urshifu, which it goes down.
Yeah, and that's great momentum shift for Angelo, and it looks like the Grassy Glide coming out into the Nihilego on Angelo's side, a clean one-hit knockout. So even though Angelo was able to switch up the pace a little bit, regain a little bit of traction, I don't know if it's going to be enough. I don't think this Rillaboom can 1v2, or is it 1v3? The Pokemon on Danielle's side, and now that I see that Incineroar is still alive, it is a 1v3, and Incineroar will most likely be going for a fake out into Rillaboom, and it looks like Angelo is just giving up on game one. Yeah. But still, a lot of great information Angelo was able to fish out from Danielle's side, and I'm very interested to see what he is able to do to maybe bring back a game two.
So one adjustment I would like to see from Angelo would be, maybe just simply giving something else a go over that Grimmsnarl, because it just didn't end up doing much in that game. And in particular, I would be a little curious to see the Komodo, even with the Finny on Daniela's end, because it seems to match up quite well into the rest of his team.
Yeah, absolutely. And if Angelo does end up bringing that Rillaboom again, it did put in some great work in game one. He should definitely be prioritizing removing the Feeny from play, so potentially that Komodo can start setting up. And even if he does opt to bring the Grimmsnarl again, if he were to bring the Komodo maybe over something like the Nihilego, those two could synergize a little bit better to potentially allow Komodo to set up under those screens, because Urshifu doesn't threaten the Komodo as much as the other members of Angelo's team.
Yes, absolutely agreed. So, are we about ready to head into game two? I think we are.
We're ready for game two. I'm very interested to see how these two players adjust, whether or not Daniele will stick with what he knows, what won him game one, or maybe he has a secondary sort of lead, and it looks like he does, opting out to send in the Incineroar and the Amoonguss. And it looks like
adjustments on both sides. Yes, the Komodo is indeed here, but so is that Amoonguss, and the Amoonguss Incineroar lead. Those two mons are also quite well known for being, a good sort of cycling pick, with the Incineroar going back out, the Amoonguss getting that regenerator when it goes back out, etc., etc. So let's see what happens here. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the Incineroar and Amoonguss lead, Daniele is free to go for a fake out spore into that Komodo, and depending on whether or not the Komodo is carrying something like leftovers over safety goggles, it will be going to sleep. So, and it's not like Angelo can switch into a grass type to potentially take the spore, because unfortunately his only grass type is currently out on the field. So maybe there's a Lumberry on one of the Pokemon in the back, but looking at his team composition, I do doubt it. So I'm interested to see how this turn goes, and it looks like Daniele is choosing not to put anybody to sleep and sending out Tapu Fini instead, so he'll definitely have to be cognizant of the fact that Misty Terrain is up. Hopefully he'll be counting those Misty Terrain terms to make sure he does not go for Spore on that terrain.
Yes, and we saw real quickly Angelo mousing over the substitute on the Komodo, and it looks like it is indeed setting up a substitute here. But with the Finny in, there's not that much it can really do to threaten it here. Like, sure, he can try to set up an Iron Defense, but then that Finny is just such a big threat to the Komodo that I'm almost not sure if Angelo even wants to stay in with the Komodo here. The fact that the Finny remove the terrain for the Rillaboom is another problem as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a very precarious position, because with those leftovers plus the grassy terrain recovery, the substitute damage would have been completely offset almost completely offset onto that Komo'o, but now the Feeny is out on the field with that misty terrain. It's a very awkward position for Angelo to be in, and I'm interested to see what he ends up doing. And it looks like he has locked in his moves, so we'll be seeing the Komo'o using a Protect, hopefully blocking some sort of Moonblast from the Tapu Fini.
Yes, and the Rillaboom simply going for a U-turn into that Incineroar, and we will see what he sends out. Grimmsnarl or Urshifu. He's not sure himself. You can see him like wavering between these two, and I'm noticing here that actually Angelo has brought 3 Monsweep to Fairy, so that Finny is gonna be a huge pain for him to deal with, I think, at this point.
Yeah,
it seems... Yeah.
Oh, so sorry. I was just saying, a very bold move to bring 3 Pokemon weak to Tapu Fini in the face of a Tapu Fini that Danielle did bring that last game. And it looks like Dazzling Gleam is coming out. Unfortunately, Angelo has switched his Urshifu into a Dazzling Gleam. It is a clean knockout on that Urshifu. Potentially, Angelo is positioning a sacrifice onto that Urshifu to get the Rillaboom back in and reset the terrain. I don't know if that's going to be worth it in the long run, though. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how much work this Rillaboom can put in.
Yes, so the fact that the Finny has Dazzling Gleam to me suggests that it might be a spec set. So now that the Rillaboom is back in with the terrain up, it's almost surely threatening knockout with that Grassy Glide this time around. So I can see what Angelo is going for here, but at the same time, Daniele can very easily reposition by going into Amoonguss, for example, since we know he has that in the back. So that is what I would expect here.
Absolutely. I cannot see a world where Danielle leaves the Tapu Fini in to potentially take a full-powered Grassy Glide right into that Tapu Fini, which threatens the majority of Angelo's team, as we just saw. It was able to one-hit knock out that Urshifu, one of the most powerful Pokemon on Angelo's side of the field. Although into this matchup, Urshifu mostly only here to threaten that Incineroar, unfortunately. It does get shut down by the rest of the team. But interested to see, yeah, so Danielle is withdrawing that Tapu Fini and sending out that Amoonguss, suspecting that Angelo did click Grassy Glide into that slot, but he didn't. He clicked Fake Out, potentially calling the switch, but taking more damage from the Rocky Helmet than it itself dealt out.
Yes, the Rocky Helmet damage was quite a bit, but oh, this body press from the Komodo, just straight up KOing that Incineroar with a critical hit, might have mattered since the Komodo had not been able to set up any iron defenses yet. So
yeah,
possibly lucky, possibly not.
I guess we'll just have to wait to see. I mean, Komodo does have a pretty good base defense, but like you said, they weren't able to go for any sort of setup moves. It is super effective, so perhaps that Danielle's Incineroar was more specially defensively trained than it was defensively trained. It looks like Tapu Fini is coming back out yet again to offset the grassy terrain and cause some more mischief over on Danielle's side of the field.
Yes, and I would say that Angelo is in a pretty big pinch here because the Komodo genuinely cannot do anything into these two, and similarly, even with a Grassy Glide, since the Misty Terrain is up and not, the Grassy Terrain that the Rillaboom so very much wants to be in, I don't believe he's able to threaten a KO here. But it is indeed still just a good old Grassy Glide.
And it looks like the Komodo is going for that Iron Defense, still behind the Substitute. I do believe it's 3 turns later. This Komodo has been sitting pretty, has not taken any damage. It also can't go to sleep, so even though we are seeing the Komodo face on a Tapu Fini, the Tapu Fini isn't even targeting into the Komodo, instead opting for a knockout onto the Rillaboom. So once again, Angelo with a Pokemon deficit compared to Danielle, but I do believe this is a better position than we did see from him in Game 1. So it's by no means over, and like I mentioned earlier, it looks like that Grimmsnarl is coming out to set up screens on Angelo's side of the field, further protecting this Komodo from taking the damage from Tapu Fini. And although we are on Misty Terrain does not boost Fairy-type moves, such like Electric Terrain boosts Electric-type moves, Grassy Terrain with Grass-type moves, etc. So interested to see how Angelo can position around this very oppressive Tapu Fini. which is switching out from the field and sending out Urshifu once again, who potentially break the Grimmsnarl's screens.
Also interesting to me here is that Daniele appears to not have brought his own Rillaboom, which means that at this point that Viscerain is staying, and that means that even if it wanted to, that Amoonguss is not going to be able to score. A Body Press going into the Urshifu, and with that finally having its Iron Defense boost actually does a lot of damage. Wow, maybe Komodo can actually clutch this out, especially with that Feeny being rather low.
Yeah, absolutely. And although it's tempting to click Spirit Break into the Urshifu, setting up a light screen might be the better long-term play just to protect yourself against the Tapu Fini, especially with that light clay. I don't believe the Urshifu is able to knock out the Grimmsnarl, but perhaps a double up into the Grimmsnarl from the Amoonguss and the Urshifu would be enough to knock out that Grimmsnarl, removing the light screen factor from Angelo's side of the field.
It is possible, since we did see Sludge Bomb from that Amoonguss, but it seems like it's just going for a Rage Powder here, and I think that's quite sensible, because at this point, Angelo's monsters don't have any great options to actually damage that Amoonguss. There's the Spirit Break from the Grimmsnarl and the Body Press from the Camillo, which are both resisted here.
Yeah, and the Grimmsnarl able to hang on against those 3 critical hit Surging Strikes, and it looks like the targeting was into that Urshifu. Although...
Yes, so Rage Powder not affecting what is surely an Overcoat Camillo here. Looks like that was revealed.
There we go. I was so confused for a second. My brain was just so confused because I was like, did that Amoonguss not click Rage Powder this turn? What is going on? Most Komoa users do run Soundproof in anticipation of a Sylveon in this format, so it's really interesting to see the Overcoat Komoa, and I think that's a massively good play on Angelo's side, anticipating that, hey, Amoonguss is not great for my matchup here, so even if the Amoonguss did spore into the Komoa, it would not really care that much.
Yes, and it even has the substitute to get around that spore, right? But we do see that Body Press going into the Finny, and it does KO, despite that, it not being very effective. And at this point, this is rather locked up for Angelo. I'm impressed that he managed to maneuver so well around that Finny with, 3 of his mons being so weak to it.
Yeah, absolutely, and the Komodo is now +2 on the defensive side, under a light screen, under a substitute. I don't think it's bothered too much now that that Tapu Fini is removed from the field. It's just going to be a little bit of a waiting game to see how long it takes to break this Amoonguss, but I don't believe the Amoonguss can do anything, and it looks like Danielle knows that, so they are just going to be forfeiting this match, and we get a Game 3, which is incredibly exciting. What are the adjustments that you would like to see coming out in this Game 3?
So I think from both players, the Game 2 adjustments were rather cool to see. What I would expect, especially on Angelo's end, is for him to bring back that Nihiligo, because when you combo that with the Komodo, those two have really nice synergy together. So that's what I think we might see this time around, but you never know.
Yeah, I would love to see the Nihiligo come back, especially because that Tapu Fini over on Danielle's side of the field is just so oppressive. And you did mention that it might be a spec set earlier, especially because we did see that Dazzling Gleam and that Moon Blast. We don't know what the last 2 moves are, but I'm very interested to see how Danielle adjusts here, because he could go back to his Game 1 lead, which did end up winning him the first battle, but Angelo was able to identify what he needed to do, and he was able to do it. So without further ado, how about we get into that Game 3?
Yes, and let's see if the players adjust their leads or not. We do see the Spectre this time around from Daniela's side. So Spectre Incineroar the lead here, and a slight adjustment again from Angelo with Nihiligo coming back, as we discussed, and the Rillaboom as well.
Yeah, the Komodo on Angelo's side kind of rolled through Danielle's team, so Danielle is hoping to shut it down with a Ghost typing and possibly a Will-O-Wisp onto the Komodo, which, even though it is based off of defense, it will still really shut down the offensive output Komodo is able to bring to the field. So very interesting lead over on Angelo's side. Um, Looks like he is considering switching in and out, but it's a very sticky situation. Both players are tempted to go for obvious plays, but they're not quite sure if it'll be red or not. Of course, you're tempted to just meteor beam into the Incineroar, but could always switch out to something else. You also want to preserve the Rillaboom, which was taken out a little bit too early last game, unable to go for those super effective grassy glides on grassy terrain. So it looks like we're running out of time. I hope that all the moves are locked in. It looks like they were. It looks like a fake out into the Incineroar, so it will not be able to get its own fake out, and a Snarl coming out from that Spectre, trying to mitigate the output that this Nihilego can cause onto the Incineroar. It looks like they are just going for that Meteor Beam. Currently at -1 special attack, going back to neutral, and the Power Herb enabling them to go for this right now. Let's see if it is enough to knock out a possibly specially defensively trained. Oh, it is going into the Spectre instead of the Incineroar, possibly predicting a potential switch.
It's a berry in the Spectre as well. Oh, very interesting choice of item, honestly.
Yeah, very interesting to see a Citrus Berry Spectre instead of a Focus Sash Spectre, which is the most common item since it is not very bulky, mostly relying on its speed and special attack to do damage before getting knocked out. So maybe Danielle has a more bulky Spectre. I'm not quite sure how much investment it would take to get a Spectre to live any sort of super effective hit, but I'm very interested to see this new variant.
Yes, I agree. And it went for a Will-O-Wisp onto that Rillaboom, but missed the attack. Ouch. That couldn't end up mattering later on.
Absolutely, and that Rillaboom is now switching out, preserving itself potentially for that late game against that Tapu Fini. Very unfortunate for Danielle missing that Will-O-Wisp. I know how it feels. A lot of players know how it feels. That's just the way the RNG cookie crumbles, unfortunately.
And this Urshifu coming in on that Spectre, which has now revealed Will-O-Wisp, being in a bit of a tough spot here because that Wisp can simply go into the Urshifu at this point.
Yeah,
so,
another bold move coming out from Angelo's side, but maybe because they saw that the Spectre is more bulky, he might be anticipating an outspeed on his Urshifu into the Spectre, able to neutralize the threat before it can do anything. Because I don't think a Spectre can tank hits with all of its training being invested into that speed stat.
True. There is the Scarf on this Urshifu, so you are correct about it presumably outspeeding here. And we do see Angelo at least considering going for the strikes into the Spectre, and yes, it seems like that is indeed what he locks in here. So curious to see how Daniela responds.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if they do go for that Will-O-Wisp, if they're even able to get an attack off this turn. I'm also interested to see what the Urshifu does. Of course, it is facing down that Nihilego, and based on the two Urshifus, I do believe that Danielle's Urshifu might be scarfed as well, being able to go for those super effective surging strikes into the Nihilego as this Tapu Fini comes in, setting up that mystery terrain and threatening both Pokemon on Angelo's side of the field.
Yes, and we do see Angelo similarly switching in Rillaboom in place of his Nihilego, presumably anticipating that Surging Strike's going into the slot. Perhaps Daniela will read it and go for a close combat or something of that sort. Instead, we will see, nope, it seems like it's just the Surging Strikes, and that will deal some decent chip damage, but Rillaboom is going to tank that pretty nicely here.
Yeah, a huge read by Angelo, switching in the Rillaboom onto the Nihilego slot, knowing that it was just too tempting for Danielle's Urshifu to click Surging Strikes to potentially remove that massive threat. Surging Strikes going out into the Tapu Fini, not going to do much damage, but any chip onto a Pokemon as bulky as Tapu Fini is good damage in the long run.
Yes, I agree, and it's also worth noting that right now the grassy terrain is out because of the order in which these switches happened. So that Tapu Fini is immediately threatened, especially considering I'm quite positive at this point that it is a Specs Fini and it cannot protect. So we do see Angelo quickly locking in his moves here, just doubling down that Feeny slot, also presumably realizing that it cannot protect and has to switch.
Looks like the Urshifu is fleeing the field with Spectre coming back out. Are we going to see a double switch this turn? Or, yes, it looks like the Amonis will be coming in, or the Incineroar will be coming in for that Tapu Fini, but with the double up into that slot, I don't think that there is any scenario where this Incineroar survives this turn. It will be going down to the combination of the Grassy Glide and the Surging Strikes.
Yes, this was a very... it was pretty big. That was a crit. Ah, that's why. But I agree, that was a very nice play on Angelo's side, because he realized at this point that he had a pin on that slot and quickly locked in his moves. And we see the Incineroar go down, but the Spectre is still in and threatening a Wisp onto both of these bombs now. So curious to see how the next turn will go.
Absolutely, but with the grassy terrain still up and the Urshifu holding a Scarf, I do think that unless the Spectre protects, if Angelo does decide to double into that slot, the Spectre will also be a threat that is neutralized from Danielle's side of the field.
That is a good point. That is a good point. At this range, I don't believe the Spectre is able to take those Surging Strikes unless it is exceptionally tanky, and it probably is not quite that HP and defense invested as it would need to be for that. So we see Daniele taking his time deciding on what to switch out, and it looks like it's his own Urshifu here.
That's actually quite interesting to me, because if they were to send out that Tapu Fini again, it would negate the Grassy Glide, or the Grassy Terrain, meaning that Rillaboom potentially could not move before the Spectrier. So I'm interested to see them choosing to send out that Urshifu instead.
Right, perhaps Daniele is trying to bait Angelo into making a misplay of some sort here, because I do think the position looks quite good for him. So perhaps that Spectrier is going to go into the Fini, anticipating that Surging Strikes again.
Potentially, but I feel like Angelo has so much leeway in this match that even if he were to misplay at this point, it wouldn't be too much of a deal, and it looks like he is splitting his damage, potentially anticipating a switch, but no switch on Danielle's side of the field. Not much damage onto that Urshifu from, or onto that Spectre from the Rillaboom, which is very interesting to see because we are on that grassy terrain, but not for long, as the Tapu Fini will be coming back out, nullifying the grassy terrain, setting up its own misty terrain, and chunking the Rillaboom in the process with that U-turn from Danielle's own Urshifu.
Yes, and we do indeed see those Surging Strikes going before the Spectre, almost... Oh, it looks like it's actually into the Tapu Fini slot. So that is a curious choice by Angelo. This means that the Spectre will actually get to move here.
Unfortunate targeting. If only Angelo had switched his targeting, both threats would have been removed from Danielle's side of the field, and Rillaboom will be going down, removing grassy terrain factor and giving Spectre that special attack boost. Very scary stuff.
Yes, but now he does get this free switch into Nihilego, which can threaten down that Fini, which again, it cannot protect here, so it's looking rough still. And similarly, the Spectrier, it's still scared of the Surging Strikes from the Urshifu, so not many repositioning options for Daniele left here. Perhaps he has to hope that, Angelo makes the wrong moves here.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if the Tapu Fini were to switch out into that Urshifu, I don't know if Urshifu can comfortably tank a Sludge Bomb from that Nihilego. Nihilego does have a massive special attack stat, and of course with the Urshifu moving first, I do believe that this is Spectre's last turn on this field if Angelo so chooses to target into it. And it looks like the Tapu Fini is opting to switch into that Urshifu, as Angelo's Urshifu does go for those Surging Strikes into the Spectrier, and it looks like just 2 hits will be enough to remove it from play.
I think the Urshifu is gonna be tanking the Sludge Bomb pretty comfortably, given that, the fighting typing and all. It's coming out here. Ooh, that actually was a lot. And
Not
I'm
as
actually
quickly as they would have
I'm
liked.
actually wrong about my typings even. I misremembered it as resisting poison, but it does not. So that was quite a big chunk of damage, but now that Urshifu on Daniela's side, which I believe we've seen at this point, a Scarf is threatening the Nihiligo, so wisely Angelo decides to switch that out into his Camillo,
Yeah, great
which
play by
will
Angelo.
tank
Sorry.
these surging strikes very nicely, right?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback off of you. Great play by Angelo, switching in that Dragon type, preserving the Nihiligo for a potential endgame against that Tapu Fini, as Angelo's own Urshifu goes for the Surging Strikes into that Urshifu on the other side, and I believe it's not going to be enough, potentially a roll.
It's so
And Angelo
close.
does get that roll, able to take out the Urshifu. 3-1 in Angelo's favor. Can this Tapu Fini do it? Is it the little Tapu Fini that could? It is able to take out both of Angelo's Mons in the field, both very weak to Fairy, especially a Specs Tapu Fini. So now the Nihiligo will be coming back out. It's going to be a Nihiligo against Tapu Fini endgame. Fortunately for Nihiligo, this Tapu Fini is potentially specsed into Dazzling Gleam, meaning that it will be able to go for something like Scald or a Muddy Water.
Yes, at this point, Daniela really needs some sort of miracle to happen to win this game. But it looks like, at this point it is very much in range of the Sludge Bomb, and Daniela is just going to forfeit, recognizing that there is no way he's coming back from this.
Yeah, very unfortunate for Danielle, but they did realize that they were just pinned by Angelo in that end game. Very great move by Angelo, preserving that Nihiligo for the end game, knowing that if you were to have two fighting types out on the field, Danielle would be baited into locking itself into something like a Dazzling Gleam, something like a Moon Blast that Nihiligo would be able to resist. But great game on both sides. I love the adjustments from both players. I love the sort of chess feel when it came to maneuvering and repositioning all the Mons, and it was just incredible to watch. Very high skill ceiling for both the players.
Yes, I agree, and I agree about the chess style comment especially. There was so much positioning going on here between both players, and I think it's especially interesting from the side of Angelo. He knew that his Camilla was one of his win cons, and then similarly, Daniele knew that he needed that Fini to deal with the Camilla. So we saw them protecting these pieces very carefully, and that was a particularly fascinating part of the match for me.
Absolutely. Well, great game to both players. Hang tight, everybody watching. We're going to go to a quick BRB, but we'll be back up with Raghome versus Mechanics in just a moment.